Started. It's a couple minutes after 3:30, so we'll get going. But I see a bunch of the grad students here that saw him talk today at lunch. But so good. I think you're supposed to be here, right? Yeah. I see lots of yeses. They're obligated. Yeah. Okay. So Craig Coburn is associate prof at the Department of Geology at the University of Lethbridge. And let me just read you a couple little specs because he won't say them. I don't think he will, so I'll say them for him. And so as you know by now, he's a remote sensing scientist up there at Lethbridge, and he's been there since '02. 20 years of experience in remote sensing, as you can probably tell from talks today over lunch. His research focuses on efforts on the fundamental aspects of remote sensing science, of course, with specific interests in low-cost remote sensing solutions and remote sensing instrument development. So we're very much interested in that kind of stuff, as you saw from some of the tours. Recently, this research has involved studying the nature of surface BRDF properties, and this research has led to the development of various instruments for sampling of surface BRDF. Chip is very familiar, Professor Bachman. I saw him a minute ago.
He'll be back.
He'll be back. There he is. Very familiar with this as well. And yeah, so I will leave it at that and take it away.
Thank you very much, Alan. First, before I start, I'd like to thank everybody at RIT for having me here. It's exciting for me, given what I do. For the students, again, I don't know if you always would appreciate this, but everyone in the world knows who you are. I think it's important that you reflect just a little bit on the people who came before you. I noticed the Imaging Hall of Fame. And the importance of the role that RIT has played in the development of imaging science over the years. So I've been reading the various textbooks that have flown out of this department at this institution for most of my academic career. So that's a thing. You're here. Congratulations. Why I do what I do is mostly governed by this place. So I had this as I was telling my class last week. This is a bucket list talk for me. So be kind. I do what I can. I wasn't trained to do any of these things as you're being trained now. As I explained at lunchtime today, I come at everything backwards, pretty much. So I'm a geographer. That's what I'm trained as. I actually get to chair the department now, and they went and promoted me too, the fools. So I work at the Department of Geography and Environment in the land of Lethbridge, where we don't see flowers very frequently. It's mostly covered by snow. But I thought I would start my talk here today with the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I thought it's an interesting thing because this accurately characterizes the way at least I've acquired knowledge through my life, which works this way. So knowledge in the field goes from nothing to high, and then confidence goes this way. And this, as the psychologists will tell you, is roughly the way that humans, they think, acquire knowledge. Is you first know nothing at all, then you ascend what's called Mount Ignorance. Okay, so you rapidly ascend this thing to I know everything, and then let's just see if this is working for you through your graduate program, right? So then this would be like day one, a couple of weeks in, I got this aced, no problem. We're gonna, I'll have this degree done by Christmas. This is easy. Boy, there's more to this than I thought. I just scanned this from the internet. I didn't type the words in, but this is how I feel about my entire research career. I'm never going to understand this. Obviously, if you've not been trained in a field, it's hard. At least you guys are getting a fantastic education in these things. It starts to make sense, and then you end up here, right, where you have high knowledge in the field. You never get high confidence again, by the way, as far as we know. And all you come up with, I say this so many times that I laughed out loud, quite literally, when I saw that phrase, trust me, it's complicated. I say that all the time. When people go, well, what about this, Craig? I go, trust me, it's complicated. Like there's an answer, but the answer is really complicated, so we're going to have to work our way through that. So I thought I'd start with where I started. So I was a pixel person, right? I'm a geographer. I'm interested in mapping things. I thought this was the way of the future. This is the 90s, right? Everybody in Canada, in the west of Canada, not in the east of Canada, where it's the land of SAR. Right? I understand that you're heading in that direction here. But in the West, it's all resource extraction and mapping and how we could possibly be useful, and I'm a geographer, so I naturally gravitate towards these slightly useful things. And so I developed a bunch of texture algorithms, and they're really fun. So they go from just a reasonably high resolution image. I'm trying to get to this one on the right-hand side. Okay, so if we work our way through, this is why they gave me the PhD, is eventually I got to here. Right? And I produced that without doing anything fancy or special or spectacular. And at my dissertation defense, so PhD students' hands, how many do we have? Okay, so at your defense, by the graybeards that are sitting on the other side of the desk, right? The funny thing is, the number of those questions that you'll remember for the rest of your life, I still remember most of mine. And one of them was, how does BRDF affect this? We gotta go back to that other Dunning-Kruger thing. So at that point, I've gone through a comprehensive exam, right? And Canada, in graduate school, when you're making your committee, you have to have somebody from outside of your discipline. I always had somebody in physics on my committees. And they recognized that I liked the way things work. So then they would send me to read. And when I would come back with questions, they'd make me read more. And then the one physicist that was on my committee said, I hope I don't need to show you where the library is. Because the physicists always assume that the geographers might not be all that bright. Okay, so you go and you read, and the last time I encountered BRDF was during my comprehensive examination process, where you had to explain comprehensive knowledge. I mean, it makes your brain explode. You have to know everything, apparently. So you study for this for a year in Canada. I don't know how it works here. Anyway, so at the end, I was asked as the final question, how does BRDF impact texture? And I went, well, and I came up with a great response. At least what I thought was a good response. There was no further follow-on questions, so obviously I tricked the questioner into believing that I might have known something, even though I was high on top of Mount Ignorance. Never thought about it again. Academic career starts, and on we go. Then, a little later on, about 2 or 3 years in, so I'm an assistant professor, which means I'm beginning to understand what my role is in the process. You'll get there if that's your route. And we had a student, I was just on the committee, but one of the first graduate committees I participated in. And he was doing a very careful experiment. And I was involved because I'm a gear and gizmos person. So I was helping him set up the experimental design. This is what was going to happen. Now we were interested in the reflectance properties of the material that is on the understory of the forest floor in the boreal forest, the world's largest ecosystem. This creates problems for remote sensing because it's, of course, the background to the subtext, which is the trees that are above, which we're trying to get at. And the moss that's there, it's Pleurozium is the one that we're interested in, and moss is non-vascular. So again, if you got to have some of that context relevant piece. I mean, the physics is great fun for how it all works, but you also need the other parts, like the what that you're studying. So knowing that it's a non-vascular plant means it doesn't have stomata, it can't close down its water holding capacity, and it's going to live or die based on its moisture content. Okay, so this is what we're doing. We're just lighting this moss up with a 500 watt halogen lamp. I've got the specifications for how we all did it. We only just used a bare fiber, just at nadir. We looked at it, and you know what? We found an excellent relationship. I mean, R² is a 0.9854. Have graduate students cartwheeling down corridors, and again, they think they're done. Welcome to Mount Ignorance, right? This is how this works. When you have that, it's almost frightful for scientists when they see numbers this high, because something's about to go very wrong. You just know it's not going to go well. But when we calculate the water band index for this particular plant, it follows a very nice straight line that we could compute. So this is the remote sensing measure. This is the actual physical property down here. The same student then goes off into the field. So he's off and studying this now in reality, and I've only loosely trained him on the field operation of a spectroradiometer, which was my bad. I should have been a little bit more careful. I was quite careful in his instructions for the laboratory measurement, but when I sent him outside, it was, I'll go and make the measurement, don't be an idiot, kind of thing. Well, he came back, and he's in my office in tears, because when he ran the exact same relationship from his field-based measurements, nothing worked. It was circular, the distribution. There was no line through it at all. And he's sitting in my office, and he's like, what happened? And I went, oh, BRDF. And he said famously, BRD what? And I went, oh, well, this is what has to happen. So it's just, you just measured it haphazardly in the field, right? I said, how did that work? Well, I just took the pistol grip, and I went around the field, and I did a bunch of this. And I went, oh, yeah, BRDF, that'll kill you every single time. And then he was like, okay, tell me more about this. And I went, I don't really know a whole lot more. Like, I can write the equation for you and I can sort through it. But I'm like, I don't have an instrument. So off to my garage I go, I build the first instrument. Literally out of a piece of medium density fiberboard. The garage is where I develop all of these things, right? So the garage, machine this part up, and 2 days later we're in the lab, we're making measurements. Now it's a crude piece of kit, but this is the rough dimensions, 60 centimeters for the sensor sled, about a meter and a bit, because that's the size of the plywood I could buy. And we stuck the ASD on it, and we basically got interesting results, right? So this is the beast, this is the topic of interest here, the setup, the lab's terrible. And we know there's lots of mistakes here. There's lots of mistakes everywhere, but remember, we don't actually know what we're doing. We're on top of Mount Ignorance now, right? So we're just about to swell over that into, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm never gonna figure this out. This is gonna, and this is all a little trajectory that we take through research. It goes on all the time. I've used this thing in the field. I've sold variants to your military. There's lots of these sort of manual things around these days. So this is sort of fun, and this is what we get. Now, just at this point in my career, I don't even know how to orient the figure properly, which now will cause fingernails on the chalkboard for me. But this is the plane of illumination, okay, right here. All right, so this is that perpendicular plane here. This is what causes most people to freak out when they see this stuff. Is technically, this is a backscatter, so the light is over here. Right, it was at 45 degrees, and you can count it down, 10, 20, 30, 40. Okay, yeah, it's hot spots right about there. That seems to be about right. Now, we didn't measure that spot technically because the instrument was there, so we just did the, spatially, we worked out by averaging what was there. Ditto here in the forward scatter direction, and then this plane here is supposed to be symmetrical. Now, it's not perfect, but this is just between 530 and 610 nanometers. So in that sort of peaky, greeny range of the plant, it's got a lot of variability, okay? Everything from 5% to 29% is what we're getting out of this plant. That's not good, but typical, actually, of many vegetated surfaces. So then we look at it in a number of different ways. So we sort of cast our gaze around some of these things. And I'm thinking, this is a non-vascular plant. Like, technically, in terms of plant biology, it's just about as simple as it gets. Right, so this shouldn't be, it's not a complex thing, it's a moss. Right, so it doesn't have a complex architecture, it doesn't have leaves and branches and twigs and things going everywhere, it's just moss. Right, we're just drying it. Right, that's all we're doing with the dry down experiment here. That's actually the grass in there, it doesn't matter, but anyway. Now this is the moss. Sorry, geez, Craig, get it together. All right, so I want to go back, we'll just tell the moss story. Sorry, back to the moss. Light is here, I did orient this one properly. Okay, it's got some symmetry, but it's not perfect. Again, 5 to 13% is what we have for that. And that's what it looks like in reality. Thank you. So now, here's the problem. When we start looking at these things, most of the kinds of information that we're looking to draw out of a very, environmental ratios, water band index, NDVI, and then all of its variants, they're focused around the stability here found at 670 nanometers versus the mobility of these areas in the near infrared. So when we look at this, and this is the same plant, same time, same everything, water content not changed, right? This is just different angles, and it floats around this much. So that's, we've got over 10% worth of variability just out of that. Even down in here, there's not much variability, which there shouldn't be, in the strong absorption feature that is there. That's 670, but here at the peak at 550, we wouldn't have expected this much variability either. So it starts to draw into question how all this works. And when we calculate out the ratios, we wrote this paper up finally in 2010. It took a long time to get there. A grad student graduated, didn't care to write the paper. Graduate students write the paper, right? Professors don't want to write the paper, right? We want to help, but it's sort of your job. They didn't pay me to say that. It's just a personal thing. Somebody asked me today, what makes a good graduate student? Write the paper. That's one of the hallmarks. Okay, so if we just grab a couple of bands for water band index that are used, the variability that we get. Now, here's the mean value here. This is the actual plant measured value, right, in terms of fresh weight, dry weight. So this is the water content. This is the retrieval we're trying to get. The mean doesn't get us the actual important observation. The variability though, and I'm going to give you the total. I'm not going to give you, 1 sigma or something. I could, but you get the idea. This is just up and down. This is up and down the arc. If you've never seen these kind of graphs before, talk to Chip later. Either one of us can help you through it. They're a bit confusing in the head. But if you just looked at it and you went just from here to here, this is alive and dead. That's what it means. That's the interpretation. In fact, through here to here is alive to dead. Okay, so this paper gets no references. We did this for a whole bunch of indexes, and it basically says, for most things, it's a simple plant. How you look at it depends on what you want for the answer. Did you want that plant alive or dead? Just look at it differently. Doesn't matter, the plant didn't care. It's just not giving you what you thought you were getting. So this is plants. This is easy. Now it gets worse. So after spending a few years running the manual machine, it came to me in a clap of thunder one day in the garage. And this is the first prototype for the the new machine. It was a quarter arc design that, giant Franken bolts and chains and sprockets and a chair in my lap, or in my office. And this is the beginnings of the new machine. I wanted to build something better, because actually moving those kinds of instruments in the field is difficult, and I was concerned that time was playing a role. The sun is moving and things are going to be changing as you're trying to acquire the measurement, and all I would like to do is demonstrate that everything is okay. Now, the alive or dead figure that I just showed you prior to this one, that was taken in a lab, right? So nothing changed. But I couldn't replicate it in the field because everything was changing too quickly. So I needed to move more fast. You needed to move, with more speed. So you need to create a robot. So I did. Right, so I built this thing here. Now it's currently buried, in this case, in a field of canola. And it's got a quarter arc, and on that arc we've attached a USB 4000, so an Ocean Optics USB 4000. So I've got one that's pointing down, one that's pointing up. We've got our usual ASD and the ubiquitous graduate student in the sun bouncing energy into my target. But no matter, it's a pretty good crop of canola. And this is at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, so we have the opportunity to work with them on some of their very small plot research agricultural plots. So there's lots of these little plots, different crops in each one, different treatments for the crops, and then this particular instrument causes no damage to the crop, so we can repeatedly measure it. Because I thought, well, if the moss was interesting, I am and continue to be more of a vegetation guy than a sand guy, but we're going to get to sand in a minute. I just thought, it's monoculture, right? Like, this isn't a whole lot different from my moss. Again, I'm still on top of Mount Ignorance. Like, I've gone down the valley, but the thing that graph doesn't show is that thing's fractal, right? No one mentioned that part, that, sometimes you go down the valley and then you hit another spot and you go, oh, geez, I don't know anything about this either. I must know everything. I'm stupid again, and on and on and on this goes. So you think, monoculture, this will be good. It's all the same thing. They planted it at the same time. I should know something about this thing. No, these results have never even come out. So I've worked on this for over a decade. I'm still working on the vegetation data. It's so complicated, it's ridiculous. I then designed and built other systems that I took this system hilariously. This one bolts onto a forklift. This is in China. Like, this was hilarious. This research has been published. And we stuck an imaging hyperspectral camera system on this. Even worse, like, holy, this is BRDF on steroids. And then you spin this thing around, and the forklift goes wherever the forklift goes, and then you do your magical measurements here. But biophysically, I could never figure out what this data meant, but then you discovered that at the Chinese research institution that we're at, they hand seed it. And there's hundreds of acres. My mind was blown. So the biophysical parameters are really variable. And the results showed that they were quite variable. Anyway, then to know that you're truly successful, somebody has to have knocked you off at least once. This is the Prada bag version. when I encountered the Chinese research group that knocked the system off of mine, like they even have the same holes. I said, well, the worst part is you copied the bad ideas. Right? If you want to, they're always a prototype. So if you're going to do these kinds of things, please don't copy my base design. Email me, because I'll tell you how we can make it better next go around. Because this wasn't any better. This was much worse. They couldn't figure out cable management for love nor money, but they have the chair of science, so I think we're fine. And this one attaches to some sort of quad thing, which I'm reasonably certain would never fly in North America. Someone would get you banned from driving out on the road. But this is the kind of answers we have currently with the system that we get. So here's three different, I just need you to take a mental picture, three different crops. Canola you're familiar with, that's the pretty yellow stuff. Peas, field peas in Western Canada, it's not like in other places, but they're like a horrid mat. Any farmers in the group? Not a one. Well, this isn't my normal audience, right? So everyone in my part of the world would know what that means. There's a mat, like the peas, they grow on the ground in a mat. In other words, they're very non-structured. So I'm trying to capture different architectures here. And then triticale is a plant that's sort of a GMO thing that has a little bit of, it's blue when you look at it, it's quite weird. So you've got canola, right, which is a planophile plant, so it's got, the leaves are oriented up. It's not really grassy looking, for the simplest way. A mat, peas, okay, so just not much architecture at all. And then those things that have a lot of architecture, right, grasses, erectophile type crops. And you see the sorts of variability that you can get out of a plant. Okay, that's all fine. Well, so watch that one. There's canola now, same day, same time, just spinning around, just looking at different angles. Right? So you get every bit as much variability out of the canola that you get out of all of the plants. So that plant can be anything. Now it's a good thing that canola flowers and turns yellow, because that's very helpful for remote sensing. We can pull that off. We can actually go, oh, it's yellow now. Good, I understand that. Otherwise, we could give you the entire range of plants in the agricultural zone out of one plant, just different angles. So it does, again, call into question. Now, we don't look at things from different angles all the time. So with consistency of angle, you can tell those crops apart. But if you went time to time, sensor to sensor, the answer starts getting complicated. And now you're at knowledge, right? Now you're at the far end of it, where it's like, well, can we do agricultural remote sensing? Well, yeah, but it's complicated. And that's my answer to all of those, which means I've done enough of this that there's a lot of head scratching. Okay, so then we get into this. I get a phone call. 2014. 2014? Is it 2014? I think it was 2014. And I'd met a guy at a conference, so PhD students pay attention. And over a glass of wine, it turns out we did our undergrad at the same institution. So we're chatting away. He could identify my Canadian accent, by the way. That's how he called me out of the group. That one there sounds like he's a Canuck. Yeah, okay, so we're chatting away. And then I get a phone call from him 3 years later. And this is how the academic world works. And he said, we're going to Algodonas and we're going to measure sand. And I thought, sand? These plant things, totally killing my career. Like, I can't get an answer. I thought it was easy. It was diabolical. I figured I'd get an answer and people would, have a celebration, maybe a parade. Nothing is going to happen. It's all really complicated. You could get it published, right? But then people would read it and ignore it because it would say things like the most common ratio calculated in all of remote sensing, NDVI, is nonsense. Done. Right? But physically, it just, there you go, just blew it out of the water. Not popular. No one's going to reference this work. Okay, so then I had to do some background reading because I don't know a whole lot about this either. But I'll skip over elements of this because you guys know this stuff. You got a whole new generation of things looking at you from above, and most of them don't have internal calibrators, so it's nice if we've got some consistency. And I do like the domed mirror approach. Excellent. Because sometimes these pick sites are terrible. Right? But we need to get a whole lot of ground atmosphere properties characterized in order to have this work. This is where I'm catching up rapidly. Okay, so we're now, I'm back up again, right? I'm back up at the top of Mount Ignorance, and I'm about to go sliding very rapidly into the abyss. And if you don't get it, this is the way a career goes, by the way. I think I should plot those out as pulses, right, of this. And at the end, you just retire. And you just go, well, over to the next generation, have fun. Okay, so we need to find areas on Earth that don't change regardless of when they're imaged. Good luck with that. It's a very restricted set, a very restricted set. Okay? Then we'd like to know imaging drift over time, differences between imaging systems, right? And if you've got ground reference, apparently we can correct these things to physical units with high precision. And specifically, you need a BRDF of the surface. Now, I'm not getting into the semantics of BRDF, right? Because I know what I'm collecting. It's okay. I understand it's a hemispherical conical reflectance factor. We all can get along. We'll just leave it the acronym at that. It's fine. We're good to go. So what do we need from these particular calibrations? Well, it'd be nice if we had a reasonable idea what the surface looked like. It turned out, again, right on top of the old mountain there. Sure, we'd go with that. I've even presented this at conferences where I've said these things. And now I'm like, it's easy enough if the surface is flat, so let's go to a dune field. I've never been to a dune field in my life. I'm from Canada. No one told me. When I first saw this place as we were pulling up past it, I kind of went, what have I done? These giant mountains of sand. Okay, most surfaces aren't flat, so that's not going to be helpful. Instead, we've modeled what surfaces should look like. I now understand why modeling. I never really got that part before. And then when you're standing kind of in a dune field, okay, now that makes sense. Because you can take some of the physical properties and model it out, and it's less dusty, right? And it's just a whole lot more detail. It's tough, but we should always check models. Maybe sometimes you find that some things, and we'll show you some of the results today, of things that are a little too simple. All right, anyways, the better the surface measurements are, the better the calibration. We all know that piece. Okay, so what do we need? Anyway, you can't really do BRDF just for those. Like if you're going into your comprehensive exams, just understand it's a theoretical thing, right? So you can't do it. It's a summation of infinitesimals. It's like, we don't do those things. So you can just do a sampling of. You can't do anything else, right? So that's all you get, is samples. And then this knowledge of the surface is, hopefully, we can get really reliable normalizations from it, hopefully. But they're really tough to catch, right? To get a really good BRDF of a surface, we were out there for what, 4 days? We had one good day. More recently, in 2018, I was at Railroad Valley. I was there for a week. Railroad Valley people, 1 day, just 1 day. There's always something that goes on. And then I was really interested in time, because why not? I was positioned in a place for the Algodonis research that just meant I had to stay in the exact same place and not move. Right? The sit and stare group is what we were called. We just sat there all day. And then I learned why things die in the desert, because from sunup to sundown, if you're sitting in the same place in the desert, even if it's not that hot, it was hot enough from people from Canada. Okay? So this was terrible. But collecting spectra in the field isn't easy. Even with just an ASD. It's not an easy task, as we learned right at the start, because when somebody first purchases an ASD or an SPC or any other spectroradiometer, and they go and measure stuff in the field, they're on top of Mount Ignorance. They think it's easy. And then over time, they learn it's not. Right? To get a really good spectral sample in the field is actually difficult to do. And if you try to then do it hemispherically hundreds of times in a very short period of time, that becomes even more challenging. Right? So it's worse. Doing this all day, I don't know. So anyways, we're going to eventually model some of this stuff, we hope. And I have a need to figure out what the temporal sequencing is, right? Because I'd like to understand how the surface behaves over time, because I have an inkling that maybe it's not really consistent, right? That maybe over time, certain effects topographically and other things are going to change very subtly how this works. And I don't know if that can be accurately characterized without a measurement to back it up. So you've probably seen figures just like this before. That's the area we're going to. That's Mexico, where we're not allowed to go. My university expressly prohibits me from going with equipment to Mexico because they'll never see it again. That's 26, 27 hours drive for me straight south. Right? And literally straight south. I get on Highway 5 and just pound miles for 27 hours to get there. I live just over the border. Imagine how ginormous your country is. Right? All Canadians go, we live in this big country, and I'm like, you can't drive it from coast to coast. In the US, you guys can drive it from border to border. Holy, whenever my students say, oh, Canada's big agriculture. I go, no, I can drive one end of it to the other in one day. So if you start at Montana and you drive to Florida, see in a week. It's bigger, you're bigger. Anyway, it's okay. This was my shot. Like, this is a picture that I took and I went, what am I doing here? Because Dennis Helder had ideas that we were going to go and sample these things. Like, we were going to walk on this with giant instruments. Chip did it. I can't. There's no way. How am I going to push this thing? It's not possible, people. I just went, no. He's like, so you don't want to do that one, Craig? I'm like, no. Am I allowed to say no? I don't know. I didn't want to die. So this was the site that we picked. And we were up in the front of this one, and then the next day we went on the back side of that bigger dude there. Anyway, that's the start part. Now, all the instrument does is it whizzes around, and the sensor that's looking at the reflected energy is coming this way up and down an arc. And then I have another one of the exact same things which I've intercalibrated between the two, and it's got a cosine receptor on it, and it looks up. So I do a real-time reflectance measurement, which is quite handy. I measure tons of sample locations, and because of the quarter arc, no one can measure in the backscatter direction of the solar principal plane. It's not a thing. Physically, there's no way to get there, but I can get to the forward scatter direction, which is what that kind of architecture allows you to do. So that's really good. So I packed up a graduate student, had nothing to do with this research at all. This is the person I was telling you about, the one with the really great personality, that was sunny and happy and a borderline genius. Bring them into the field, they're always fun. He's trying to hold that panel level. How do you think we're doing? Right, so remember, there's variability that are gonna, like this is, again, I still think I know what I'm doing, but that panel's nowhere even close to level, and that does matter, right? So this is part of taking a measurement in the field. But we've given up on the ladders and things are starting to get cast aside. The surface was hard to find any area of it that wasn't chewed up. Right? As we were out there just post the active season for it in terms of recreation. And this is a site that we think is going to be useful. So this is the one spot where we actually were okay. You'll notice the tracks of the goniometer are here, and that's because this footprint, which is the grad student walking right into the area we were going to measure. He went one step, and I was like, yeah, get out of there. It wasn't that nice, actually. But, so we were left with this is the spot. We also had to deal with these guys. Right, so the guys in the dune buggies ripping around. And then my grad student, because I forgot to bring chairs, brought Canadian flag fold-up chairs. In land that has these guys with, don't tread on me and Jolly Rogers and stuff, and, get out of my country. I'm like, what are you doing with a can of Bud Light? And I'm like, I really don't know. The hockey game's on at home. I'll see you in a day. So anyway, we had some challenges in the field. Anyway, so we did as much as we could. We banged away we do that measurement, the whole thing, 217 points we did in it's about 10 minutes, which is, it's faster than anything on the planet for that kind of resolution. We normally do 10 degrees on the zenith to 60. We don't go past 60, mostly because bad things happen mechanically, like the sensor falls off the sled sometimes. Anyway, but the other team said, well, let's do 5 degrees to 30, and even though those two plots overlaid perfectly. We went sunrise to sunset, so these are long days of field work. 7 minutes to complete that one, 11 minutes for the 10. So 11 minutes for the entire scan is very fast for this thing. And then we looked at the change for this diurnal cycle piece. This is what we're interested in. And the idea was to be able to be out there measuring so that we could get a complete set of sun angles for typical overpasses. So in a single day, we could try to mimic the entire cycle. So we worked pretty hard on that, and then we just sat there and stared. So this is what we collected, and this would be January to December at the approximate satellite overpass time. Right, that would be the range variation. So we got close. It's not perfect, but this is a pretty good day actually, with lots of sampling in and around solar noon, which is like the most boring time to look at sand. I didn't know these things, still on top of Mount Ignorance, doing what I can. Then we have tons of calibration. We have a very deep process that I developed over the last, how many years, 15 years, to pipeline the data through. And there's all sorts of checking that goes on. Sometimes there's difficulties, but you sometimes find outliers. Like, what's that doing down there for digital counts? I don't know. Throw them out. Keep working. This is what you do. And then I'm using these USB 4000s, and I find that they just, the spectra are not as good as what I could get out of an ASD, but I do intercalibrate the two things, so I'm always taking an ASD measurement, and then I take a nadir collection. There's a sequence of nadir collections from the goniometer, and then I figure out what the offsets between the two things are. And I transform the one into the other. All right, so at least it's somewhat traceable, and I can figure out what I do with it. And then you get the data back. Let's not worry about this, because that's just a single point, that's an error. This is how I always identify where we are positioned relative to the sun. There's no moving the instrument while you do the sequence of measurements. You park it, and you just measure all day. So that's the shadow created, that's cast by the arc. Right? It's a very thin arc, so it casts a nicely defined shadow right through the middle of your measurement cycle, and you can work that out, and then you rotate those positions or move the points, right? And then just create a surface from that. Over time, in discussions with Chip, actually, I don't make those kinds of graphs anymore. I do these now with a continuum, which is much better and more interpretable. But this is what it looks like. This is variation per wavelength. So it's not too bad. I'm not worried about these little spots over here anymore at 10 and 20 degrees. I think I have a reason that those might be there. I'm still a little bit unsure. But it's boring. It's not vegetation. So it's about as boring as toast. But when we start getting into variations over time, that's where things, to me, get quite a bit more interesting. Because at solar noon, it flattens out nicely. The sand just, poof, it just flattens out quite a bit. But in the morning and the afternoon, we actually get quite a bit. That's a bowl shape is usually the way these are described. So it's much brighter at lower angles. And then I was interested specifically in how quickly we get from here to here, right? Because that's important. This one actually also shows that we've got a little bit of a forward scattering as well, right? Which is a little unusual. Now, we've received some criticism for elements of this because it's not explained in the models, but it is a measured value. What we need is backup measurements. This is the biggest problem that we're having right now, is how do I get back from Canada and get these things done? It's difficult. Okay, so this is the essential dynamics of what happens, that we get high degrees of variability proceeding to sort of nothing and then back up. So it's symmetrical about solar noon in terms of what happens, but this is reflectance variation from nadir. You know, 15, 20%, right, across. It's massive. So you may not want to have a satellite overpass with a low sun angle and the wrong look angle, and then try to use that as a calibration target. That wouldn't be very helpful. Okay, so that's our total overall variation, which is, again, it's around 10, 12%. Okay, then that's what it looks like we decided to simulate modus bands for this. Within that pipeline of processing, I can simulate any band using whatever the band shape is, just process them through as normal. But you can see that it varies even per wavelength. So once we get up into the sort of near infrared, so the 850-ish range, that the ups and downs change quite a bit, where some of the other areas don't vary as much. And let's not worry too much about here, but just the ups and downs that you get and these 800 nanometer read. And these are, again, it's not the sensor's not doing this. This is what the surface is doing. So that's tough. That was in the solar principal plane, the first set of graphs. The second one is in the perpendicular plane, so I've changed the axis because that's a plane of symmetry, so it shouldn't change that much. That's why sensors view the Earth in that dimension. Right? It's because out this way shouldn't vary as much as up and down this way would. Okay, so it's kind of what we expect there relative to the whole thing. And then we didn't talk about this beforehand, but railroad valley. So this is done. That data were published. I don't know enough about elements of it. And then I was looking around, and there's two PIC sites on Earth that have a BRDF that's published. This is one of them. So Railroad Valley, Nevada. So in 2018, I contacted Jeff again because we almost both got fired the first time because of the financial transactions between the US and Canada. So I said, Jeff, if I just drove to Railroad Valley, is that okay? And I just do this and we don't have to involve the accountants? And he said, yeah, Craig, that's cool. So I went and he told 2 friends and they told 2 friends. And pretty soon NASA and JPL and the folks from Digital Globe and like half the world sort of shows up. And I was like, I was just going because I thought I would put my finger over the hole in the dam that is the data set that you have for Railroad Valley and maybe help tie this whole story together. I fixed the boom for the Spectralon panel so that it's nice and level now. It doesn't bend. I've also equipped the goniometer with a number of radio-controlled devices that actually allow me alone to do the entire operation, which is just about unheard of in BRDF. I can sit and run that thing all day just by myself. It's a tiring day, but you know, I'm not that old yet. Okay, so this is where I was parked, right on the edge of the MODIS low-res site. And the interesting thing was, for the first time ever on the planet, we had a back-to-back measurement. So Carol Brugge from JPL brought out parabola, and parabola is sitting just outside. The Arizona trailer is right here, and it was sitting here. So we're about half a mile apart. I don't know miles, but we're about a little under a kilometer apart. Anyway, this was fun. No one's ever done this, as far as I'm aware, is compare these 2 modalities, right? So for those who don't know, parabola is a 6-band radiometer, and it spins, okay, and it's got a sensing head, and it looks out and scans out. But it also does the whole thing. Like it goes to 90, I don't understand what that is, right? Because you're looking at the horizon there, and that's infinity, and I don't think you should do that. But then it scans up, it does the atmosphere, it does the whole thing. Okay, it looks around. And then it spins around as it does this. So it needs a big, consistent target in order to have that work. Now, a goniometric measurement's looking at the same spot from all different angles. Right? So they call theirs a BRDF, and I don't know if that's true because I think that they're looking modalities all wrong, but let's see if it works. Right? So there we are, the new contraption, the new setup. This is what the surface looks like. So it's kind of chunky, is how it's been defined technically in the past. Right? These are little depressions that are caused by sort of like a deflation. They're a dried out surface, right? So the old lake bed. And it periodically is wetted. So it's not great. It's not like sand. So the new pipeline for processing is working pretty well. This is what we have, variation per wavelength. So you can see here at the lower end, 450 nanometers, nothing really varies all that much. We started picking up a great deal more variation up at the higher wavelengths again. So that's sort of fun. And then this directly compares. So this is the exact same time. And this is parabola. Okay, so this just, these are the same bands. Parabola 650 wasn't working, right? So that's forward, that's this, that's not data, right? But this one, shows the same thing. Now the fun thing is, when they pulled up, I was already set up, so we never intercalibrated anything, that's not done, we should have. We never it was so busy, we just never did it. We never looked at each other's panels, we didn't take ASD coincident measurements of each other's surfaces. Nothing. I just want you to remember that as we move forward, because we were talking a bit more about error in the past. So we have to look at that. Now this is to 90. All right, again, I don't know what this looking at the horizon thing is, so just concentrate on that circle here, because that's to 60. And now we don't orient in the same way. Again, it's just a matter of convention. This is to a compass direction. That's the way the sun's coming in. I would orient that down. Now they've got a shadow line that happens because of the mast. And they also have their panel is situated down there. So they missed some of that stuff. And then this is MODIS. So at the same time, right, we're gathering up people in this little scientific team to go, let's have a really good look at what this most important pick site on the planet actually looks like. So this is the MODIS product, oriented the same way as Carol's, but not dissimilar to what we're doing in terms of the variability that it's showing. But I've always said that it looks a little smooth, and I'm proximal to that pixel. Like I'm basically standing right in it. So it's a little smooth, but it's a big pixel, so it's averaging over a much larger area. That's part of the upcoming story. Okay, so this is what it looks like over time. It's just 500 nanometers. These are different scales, by the way, but I just wanted to show you, this is just the precession of the hot spot. Okay, so low on the horizon, that's its apex. And then this is it going back down. So it's just like this whole thing kind of leaks up and then waves down. So it's that same pattern we've seen before, right? And then per wavelength, it's doing the same kinds of things we expected in the past. with the exception this little thing is back, right? This little blip that's over in the corner there, which I still think could just be a coding problem. It's hard. In the vegetation research, I never saw this problem, but I think it's actually within the instrument itself. Now, anyways, this was the first graph that Carol sent me. The backscatter is negative here. Forward scattering is positive. Her data are in the asterisks, and my data are the lines. I just about fell off my chair. And so if you look at the scale over here, right, we're, give or take, we're only ever a few % off, which considering we never intercalibrated, which would be a major source of error to bring those back into alignment, the shape is nice, right? That seems to be good. And we're right bang on, and this is our processing and her processing completely independently. So that's an independent validation of the two things. Then if we look, progression from the solar principal plane to the principal plane, so we're gonna just kind of make an L. So we've got the solar principal plane. I can't look in that direction. Again, she can, or sorry, it's the blue line. So my blue line only goes here, her blue line, she can look back at the way the sun is coming in because she's looking, anyway, the sun's coming in and she can look at it, but she can't be in it because it's not goniometric, right? Anyway, so she gets quite a bit more symmetry here at in the perpendicular plane than I do. There's a little bit of asymmetry. Now it's just a few %. Again, look at this, remember the scale is not perfect here, but that's pretty neat. Oh, this data is just published November 6th. So you're the first people who've ever seen it, right? Unless you read the paper, which I'm pretty sure you never read the paper yet. And then we compare it to other things, right? So this is the MODIS data. Now, some of the work that JPL are doing is actually to charge this. Like I didn't show you the Miser data because that's what's used to calibrate the Miser data, so no surprise, the two lines fit. The MODIS one's a little bit different. It's based on a different model. So anyways, that's showing a certain degree of symmetry as well. And in this case, the MODIS data is also showing differences in magnitude at angles greater than 60. Okay, so that's kind of neat. This is, again, that same bowl shape that we're getting. So that's really good. So we're back, right, to the Dunning-Kruger effect. So here we are. This isn't a done thing. Research is never done. I don't mean to scare you with that. Right? It's just an is thing. So we continue to ride this wave for your entire career, just up and down, up and down. And this is always where I hope to end up. And on this particular piece of research, I'm just approaching here. Like, it's starting to make sense on this stuff. I'm not here yet, though. Like, even for the vegetation I'm here. I've spent a lot of time with my head in that one. I haven't spent as much time with this stuff. I've only spent the last 4 years. So really not a whole lot of time research-wise looking at these problems. When we start looking at this kind of outcome with those data, I'm super happy that we managed to get that done. Because it does validate what we're doing in the field, and it does provide a really rich source of data for people who want to look at these things in the future. The only problem is we just have 2 of those sites on the planet that we've got that tied to, and there are 9 in the database, so we need to get to the other ones, and we need to get that kind of push done. The problem is it's a global exercise. It can't just be the function of one country, and not all of these places are nice or kind. Very difficult to get to sometimes. But I'm always willing to try. And with that, I'm pretty close to on time. So that was the end of the research presentation. So my conclusions are simple, right, as we go forward, right? It's like, okay, you've got a nice little bowl shape, that's fine. It's similar to what others have reported, but not the same. I think the scaling aspect of this, when we go from parabola, has got a much bigger footprint than I have. Right? So the fact that I break symmetry there is probably a function of scale. And as a geographer, of course, I would say that. But maybe there's a continuum, right? From the MODIS-based stuff down to the parabola stuff, down to the ground stuff. And if you want to calibrate your sensors into the future, you don't need the MODIS BRFs, you need mine, right? To account for some of those things that physically you're seeing on the ground. Right? So that's going to be there. Now, it changes significantly over time. I'm trying to work this up for that Railroad Valley data. Carol said baby steps. That was her email back to me. Baby steps, Craig, baby steps. Sand in general, backscatters, that's fine. This nonsense at Railroad Valley is not really sand, it's more of a silt, but same idea. We really need to work on the scale issue. So how does that process? Right, so I'm interested to try that with some unmanned aerial vehicle type things and get some of that stuff understood a little better. In general, it's pretty symmetrical, but it's not perfect. It's always not as perfect as you would like when you measure it. And I'd like to see some of those things fixed in models so that we're more accurate with the modeling work that's been done. This change of pattern happens reasonably rapidly. Like that procession towards flat and boring happens pretty rapidly and then gets flat and boring for a long time and then shuttles off quickly. So the rate of that change is important because that would allow us to get a better characterization of how that would work. The role of the surface ripples at my scale was minor, but at scales that go down from me is major, and at ripples that are larger than we saw is major. Like there's a whole, it's complicated there, okay? This desiccated chunky surface at Railroad Valley is actually more consistent than the dune areas. Right? It was in our measurements. Okay, and with that, I say thank you. I included myself cheekily in the list, right? The Alberta Terrestrial Imaging Center is the group that we have at Lethbridge. But just happy to be included in such a great group. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you very much. Questions is next. I like this picture because it shows the solitude of the graduate student in the experience. Quiz time.
Yeah, any questions?
Do you feel like we need to push harder on the general trends in the shapes of these BRDFs, or the absolute magnitude and the absolute variability in them?
Is it wrong to say both?
They have different impacts on what you're going to do with it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'm going to go with absolute first, and then work on the rest. I still think that's part of the. I'm not there yet. Yeah. I can't yet say it's complicated. I know it's complicated. I'm waiting to get there, though. But in order to even just get it roughed out, we need to have that one characterized. But that's going to require. Like the hard part is, we spent 5 days to do the Railroad Valley piece. We got one good data set. Oh God, I'm going to go back. Like I'm determined that way. Frustratingly, a determined person. So like, where's my replicate? Where's my error bar? I always complain. Right? I can't compute one. I want one though, really desperately. I'd love to be able to go out for 5 days. I mean, the fact that I'm saying this in public. I'd like to go out for 5 days and do exactly the same measurements for all 5 days and just simply measure the variability at each time frame. Yes, I would. Yeah, I think that's great. You know, like, welcome to science, guys. I think that'd be fantastic. I think it would be hard to publish in some ways, but I'd go out there and just plow through that and just as much data as we could get, say 5 days in a set, cram it all together, and then precisely see how that changes. That'd be neat. Right? And then I think we'll get somewhere.
So I'm really confused on the whole scale problem.
Yeah.
Because here you have the small instrument, and then you have, MODIS flying overhead. And how can we? It's just so uniform, that area, that we can, say that we can compare the two, I guess. But I guess one of the things I was thinking of is your field of view. Obviously, you could change on your sensor to look at different scales, but that's still a very small scale compared to what MODIS is looking at.
Yeah, but then it gets confusing, because if I'm at 8 degrees right now, but I do 10 degree steps. So if I start doing wider fields of view to get my field of view bigger on the ground, I start overlapping my steps. So then then we're back again, right? Oh, I think I know what I'm doing. Oh, gee, I don't know what the effect of that is. Oh, crap, I don't know. And I think I'm okay when I'm inside the angular move, if I'm inside it with my optical field of view. Right, I'm okay. But I need a bigger scale. But we have smaller systems. Like there was another part I didn't show because the folk at Digital Globe came out and they had an ASD on a stick, right? And they moved it over a hula hoop. It was right beside me, and I was like, "What are we doing now?" With a hula hoop and a thingy, and theirs looks. I mean, there's a scale function there for sure, The fact that we look anything at all like MODIS is testament to the fact that that surface is consistent. But the lack of variability, like the break of symmetry, right? Because they're perfectly symmetrical-ish, right? Given the vagaries of everything, they're pretty close. But there's a model in the background running, right? So that I don't know if the symmetry is coming from the model or if it's coming from the data. I don't know. Someone needs to tell me. But in the data that we get, we have this slight asymmetry, which is probably caused by the structure of the material, probably. But again, I got one. It's an N of 1. It's so frustrating. This world, like. I live a long way from that site too. I'd like to get there at least every once in a while so I could answer your question, which is what is the scale of this? Which one matters? If they all show similarities, which one's, like one of them's got to be more right. I'm not too sure which one's more right. I would like it if my footprint was the same as a pixel or larger than, right? To be inside of it, that'd be okay. But there's also that whole continuum. Like, at what point, if I'm going up, do I start looking like MODIS? That's neat. But if I get the UAV thing working with concert flying, I'll be able to do that. Because you would just be able to plot this fictitious goniometric move at a very large scale, right? I could move it, with a couple of instruments going. You could and do the whole thing. And then we get an answer that that should be in a database. Unless it's perfect, and we know it never will be. So I think you do need to consider scale.
All right, I'll go ahead.
Sure.
The question of variability that you're seeing with the BRDF measurements, especially for vegetation, there's some of these models that are out there. I know MODIS uses Rossley or ProCell. Do they capture some of these variations, or not really?
Well, for vegetation, I mean, again, it's at a different scale. But it's not at a scale that's particularly helpful.
Okay.
So if you say this is the BRF that I've got for this agricultural crop, I would go, well, gee, like your pixel's massive. That's not what's driving this.
Sure.
And it ends up looking to me, given the number of these that I've seen, it always looks too smooth. And it's always way too symmetrical, because I don't see that symmetry when I'm in the field.
Yeah.
All you need is a plant to flag, right? Or a leaf to be somewhat heliotropic, like just follow the sun a little bit, symmetry broken.
But that's
Can't
more
account for
scaling,
that there.
but that's more of a scaling issue that the
Sure, because then if you go up high enough,
Yeah.
that averages out.
Yeah.
And then you're back to MODIS.
Yep.
Okay, so if I'm a farmer and I'm trying to figure out the right way to do something, and I'm trying to use these kinds of data, how am I going to get that to work? I don't know. It's unfortunate. Right? Yes?
Is there any kind of pattern of how the BRDF is changing over time?
Yes. So we find it's far more variable with lower sun angles and lower view angles. I mean, the two Helmholtz reciprocity works. You can flip the two. But yeah, like when the sun's, I mean, and I don't see the sun that high in the sky. This is another weird thing for a Canadian whenever we come that far south. Is you're like, what's the sun doing there? It's not there in my world. The sun never comes about here, right? So when you see a sun up here, you're a little bit taken aback, right? You're like, oh, I don't never see that. But when that happens, I thought it was really neat when I was looking at the data that it lulled, like it just hung. And that surface, the Algodona surface, just hung. And then woof, and then it fell off. And I was like, whoa, that actually makes for a really good calibration target, right? Something that for a range of solar angle is going to be invariant, or is going to be boring, right, flat. It doesn't matter, like magnitude will be changing, but as long as the across the board is reasonably flat. But then when it tips, it's like, wahoo, and it shovels fast. Railroad Valley does the same thing. Like when you're out there at noon, like there's probably a 3-hour period where you can look in any direction as you're just standing there. It's just boring. But in the morning, right, at low sun, I couldn't get the folks to drive me out early enough in the morning. It's another long story, folks, but maybe it'll be a beer later and I'll tell you about fieldwork. But I wanted to get up at 4 in the morning to go out there. I just couldn't get anyone to agree with me. It's like, if we get up at 4, I can catch first light. As soon as it crests over that thing, I can nail it. And they went, we're having breakfast at 7, we're not going there, we'll see you at 9. And I'm like, 9? 9's too late. In the afternoon, you've built a little bit of cloud. And you're getting some low cumulus. So it wasn't really super handy that way, but I'd love to go out there, just camp out there, and then go, what does that look like when it first ramps up? Because that would help for like this time of year if you were going to use that as your pick site. Because what does it look like now? Well, it's got a lower sun angle now. So then how variable is it? I thought it was quite variable, and then it gets super boring fast, which was cool. Other questions? So let's keep it. Don't. Oh, and they're doing I didn't put the picture in where I have the guy that's got the trailer, like the tractor trailer load of pipe, and he's driving up the middle of the whole site because he's got lost, and he comes off to ask me where he's going, and I've got that contraption out in the field, and I look like someone who can give you directions. No idea. And there's actually, unfortunately, a Canadian mining company. Sorry, folks. That's got claims all over the place, and the area has not been set aside as a reserve for our community, which is tragic. Like, you could lose it tomorrow to oil exploration, which means the world's oldest calibration site would be gone. And even now, you can see it on that image, right, that there's some infrastructure down in that bottom corner. So I know that the team in the US are working towards that, but it's very difficult. I think is it mission critical? I don't know. There's other areas you could look at. Other questions? All solved?
All right, let's thank our speaker. Be out in the lobby.